All right, hello everybody. Thank you for coming out this evening. My name is Scott Tappa. I work in the Dean's Office of the College of Letters and Science over at UWSP, and thank you all for coming. Before I get to introducing tonight's speaker, I just want to put in a plug for our talk next month. As you can see from the pamphlet on your chair, it's November 13th, also a Tuesday, titled The Great War in the Midwest, Publishing John Herman's Foreign Born by Ross Tangadal from our Department of English. It's also part of an ongoing exhibition and series of events we have over at the Carlston Gallery in the NFAC building at UWSP on the German immigration experience in the time of World War I. The exhibition only goes on for another week or so, so if that interests you, you better check it out before it goes down. So anyway, but on to tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Tommy Heimonen, who's an assistant professor of computing and new media technologies over at UWSP. Before joining our university in 2015, he worked as a researcher at the University of Tampere in his native Finland. He holds a PhD in interactive technology and a Master of Science in computer science. His research and teaching covers various areas of human technology interaction, including interactive design, visual data analytics, and pervasive and multimodal computing. Tommy lives in Wisconsin Rapids with his wife, Jessica. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Tommy Heimonen.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Happy to be here. I've been in front of students for 6 hours today, so getting a little fatigued, but I'm trying to get through this in good order. So when Scott asked me to think about a topic, I was like, well, I could talk about future because nobody really knows what's going to happen, so I might be right or I might be wrong. But some of these things that I'm talking about are really something that have been in the news quite a bit lately. Things like artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, robots, virtual reality. What I'm trying to do is just kind of try to dig into what does it mean to use these technologies. What are the pros and cons? Are there some things that are going to be awesome? Are there some things that are going to be terrible about these technologies? So I don't really have answers, but I can give you some tools to think about these technologies and some ideas about how you might affect the future if you feel like the future is not something that you want it to be. So briefly about the content, I'll start with some definitions. So a simple question like, what is interaction? I think most of us have some idea, like I'm using this clicker to go through the slides, I'm interacting with it. You're using your smartphone, you're interacting with it. But what is interaction really? Is it just pushing buttons? Or is there something that goes a little deeper than that when we think about using technology? I'll talk a little bit about the current status. So how do we interact with things right now? So what are the main ways that we interact? And then what is the future? Or I guess I'm going to talk more about what the future should be from my perspective as somebody that is studying this field. So let's start with what is interaction? Well, this is one definition that I came across. All the ways the user can communicate or otherwise interact with the computer system. That's not really satisfying. That's just kind of saying that, well, you're communicating with the computer. A more general approach is to say that there is some kind of relationship between people and technology. It's not just pushing buttons, we actually have some kind of relationship with the technology that is determined by what is our intention. So what is my intention in using this clicker? My intention is to go through the slides so I can give my talk. But if I'm using, let's say, a thermostat, I have a different intention. So the interaction is really a two-way relationship that is defined by what the user is trying to do. Still not satisfying, I guess, so I'll go into more examples of the different kinds of facets or different kinds of lenses that we can look at interaction through. So the first one is interaction is a dialogue. And I think this is perhaps the way that most people think about using some kind of technology. We have people, we have computers, and we take turns to communicate. I click a few keys, the computer thinks, it does something, it tells me the response, I click a few more keys, and the computer thinks. So we're basically having a dialogue. The key thing here is that when this kind of interaction takes place, the computer needs to understand what the user is saying, and the user needs to understand what the computer is saying. And this is not always the case. Think about a new smartphone. Think about a website that's kind of confusing. It's not always clear what the computer is trying to say, and it's not always easy for the person to really tell the computer what they want the computer to do. So if we think about interaction as a dialogue, good interaction is simple, understandable, and natural. So essentially, we should be able to have a dialogue with a computer or technology that is like this dialogue I'm having with people. You're pretty passive right now, but there's time for questions in the end. But essentially, it's a two-way street. People talk to the technology talks back. The second way to look at interaction is that it's basically us using technology as a tool. So the technology exists so that we get something else done. So we don't interact with technology because we like it. We interact with technology because we want to change something in ourselves, in the environment, whatever it is. So the reason why we use technology is something that goes beyond the tool itself. I used my smartphone this morning to check the weather. I'm not interacting with my smartphone just to interact with it, not to have a dialogue with it. I want to know what the weather is so that I know if I have to wear a jacket or not. In this case, good interaction is how useful is that interaction? Can I get what I want to get out of that interaction? Well, I got my weather forecast, so I was happy. But sometimes you use some kind of technology and it doesn't do what you want it to do. Some of you might have Google Home or Amazon Alexa at your homes, basically a speaker that talks to you and you can talk to the speaker. Sometimes it doesn't quite understand what you're trying to say. So you're trying to do something, but the usability is not very good. It doesn't understand you. It's not effective. It's not efficient to use that technology. And then finally, we can think about interaction as an experience. So when you use technology, there's always some kind of emotions attached to that. So this guy, I think, is using some kind of virtual reality game. He's playing and doing things, and he seems to be having a good time. So in this way, interaction is about the expectations that somebody has. You know, how do I want this interaction to take place? How is the interaction unfolding? There's actually some meaning in the experience that you have with that technology. Most of us probably won't have much of an experience using a microwave oven. You know, you just heat up your food and that's it. But if you're playing a game, you probably want to be, you know, entertained, you want to have fun and things like that. So in this sense, good interaction is something that really satisfies you. It stimulates you, it's satisfying emotionally, it's pleasing aesthetically, so it gives you a good experience. Okay, so these are different ways how we can interact. How do we actually interact right now? What are the different ways that we typically use technology? I tried to find a couple of examples of typical ways that people use technology these days. If we start at the top left here, looks like a car. All the little buttons that you have on the door to open up your windows and things like that. Then we have a phone or tablet with the search engine there. Then we have another tablet with a pen. And I don't know what this is, but I think it's a guy that has a virtual reality headset and he's running around in the forest playing a game or something. So we have some labels for these different ways to interact. So this is called instructing. I'm basically interacting with technology by giving it commands. I'm instructing the technology to do specific things, like open the window, close the window, open the trunk, and so on. In this type of interaction, when I'm using Google or some other search engine to find information, I'm essentially having a conversation with that system. You can type a question into Google, like how much is 2 plus 2, and it'll tell you that it's 4. Then we have manipulating. So here, somebody's using a pen to click on things on the screen. Manipulation is a very typical way to interact with computers these days. We use a mouse, we click on things, we drag things to different places, we open windows, we close windows using the mouse. So that's manipulation. You're manipulating different objects on the screen. And this last example is exploring. So we have some kind of an environment inside the technology. In this case, maybe he has some kind of virtual world inside that headset that he's exploring. Another example would be if you have motion detectors on your yard and you walk out when it's dark, the light will turn on. You don't actually interact with these sensors directly, but it detects that you're walking outside, and it's a type of interaction. You're not just directly interacting with that particular sensor. Instructing, if you think about typical devices in your home, your microwave, your stove, thermostats, TV, we usually use instructing. It's a pretty good way of interacting for simple tasks. We have to do something quickly and efficiently, and it's reasonably repetitive. Then we have manipulating. This is something that for most people is really easy to learn. If you start using a computer, you get immediate feedback. When you click on things, they highlight. When you double click on something, it opens up that program. You're using a painting application, you see a line on the screen. So it's pretty easy to pick that up. It also gives people this feeling that, hey, I am in control. I'm clicking on things, I'm seeing things happening on the screen. So manipulating is good for tasks that you do something in. So you're trying to get something done with the technology. Conversing, this type of interaction is pretty good for people that either have some kind of disabilities, so they cannot use the other types of interaction, but if they can still explain to the computer what they want to do, they can use the computer. For children that might have difficulties with using a mouse or a pen, and people that are just kind of technology phobic, so they don't really care about technology, they don't want to use these complicated things. If you can talk to technology, that's kind of easier to approach than having to learn how to use a mouse or learning how to use a smartphone, tapping on the screen and things like that. And finally, exploring. So this is something that can be very natural if you have some kind of an environment that kind of lends itself to moving. Games, movies, different kinds of interactive content. You're not really seeing the real world, you're seeing some other world, but you can use the same things that you use in real world. You can look around, you can turn around, you can look up and down, and the technology will track you and it will show you whatever you would see in that virtual world when you do that. If there are any people that play games here, you might be familiar with this concept. Okay, so what is the challenge? What is the problem with all of these things? Is everything is perfect? There are no problems using technology, or is there something that we might be able to improve? So something that is happening right now is a shift. We're moving from personal computing to what is called ubiquitous computing or pervasive computing. It's in some way, it's the third wave of computing. Back in the day, we had mainframes, so there was one computer for everybody. Then we had personal computing. We had one computer for every person. So everybody has a laptop, or they have a desktop, or they have a phone. But now what we have is basically a computer that is invisible. We have several computers that serve every person. Your fridge has a computer, your microwave has a computer, your alarm clock has a computer, your smartwatch has a computer. So there's multiple computers for each person. The challenge is, how do you interact with an invisible computer? What if I don't have my keyboard and mouse? I don't have a screen. How do I interact with that? I can't really touch anything. I can't see something on the screen. So really talking to the technology seems to be the best way to do this. That's why a lot of these things, such as the Google and Amazon technologies, the way that you use them is you say, hey Google, do this, or Alexa, do that. Another problem or challenge is that these days people are really used to this heads down interaction. If you look at people out and about, everybody's staring at their smartphone. There are some funny videos of people walking into other people, and there are some recommendations we should put pillows around light poles and things like that so people don't run into them. But there's also a shift going on. We're moving away from this head down interaction to a head up interaction. So instead of people staring at their phones, they might actually be staring at the world through their phones. So the challenge here is, how do we interact with the world? Now, this is probably not real. At least I hope it's not. The idea that I wanted to communicate here is that pretty soon we're going to have technologies where you can walk around and you can see some information that is overlaid with the real world. I mean, I might be looking at you guys and I might see your names, or I might see some information about you that I can use to give a better talk, for example. Or I might be trying to find some store in town. I might see these instructions overlaid with my vision to tell me that, hey, you have to take a right turn here. So what is then the future? Well, if I knew that, then I probably wouldn't be here talking to you guys. I would be somewhere else making a lot of money. So predicting the future is not easy. But I do have some ideas that I want to share with you. In some sense, the future is already here. A lot of the things that I mentioned briefly, they already exist. Some of you might have a device like this, a smartwatch or a health tracker. It tracks everything you do. You can interact with it. It can tell you, what is your pulse right now. You really should be getting up and walking around because that's healthy for you. We also have technologies that help people with medication. So we have smart pill bottles that tell you, hey, you need to take your medication right now. We have drones. You may have heard that Amazon, for example, is planning to increase deliveries by drone. So pretty soon it's not going to be the postman that brings you your packet. It's going to be a drone that kind of lands on your front step and drops off the packet. And of course, we have something that has been on the news quite a bit, self-driving cars. So pretty soon, apparently, we don't have to drive around ourselves. We just have to tell the car where we want to go, and the car will drive itself to the destination. So the future is here in some sense. The question is this the future that we want the future to look like, or is there something that we can do about it? So this is maybe a little bit of a, I wouldn't say sarcastic question, but a question that doesn't have an answer. Is the future full of opportunities or not? Kind of depends if you think about, is the glass half full or empty. But I think we have real opportunities here to develop these technologies in such a way that people benefit from using these technologies. So if we think about augmented reality, Pokemon Go, you might have heard about the game where you walk around and you chase Pokemons. Not maybe the best use of this technology, but think about what kind of opportunities we might have if we have a device that can tell us something about the environment automatically. Is it safe to go there? What's the weather going to look like in a few hours? What is happening around here right now? I need to have a pizza. Where's the best place to go to? What if the technology could, give us all that information without us actually having to try to find that information? Invisible computing. I really believe that these devices have the potential to make us smarter, in the sense that we don't have to remember all the things that we have to remember these days. Because again, why do we want to remember things? Because we need to get something done. Is that something that we need to do as human beings, or can we perhaps have the technology help us to remember things for us? And then we have jobs that are dull, dirty, and dangerous. Why expose people to the dangers, the boredom of these jobs if we have machines that can do the jobs as effectively or more effectively than people? If we think about interaction, this typically entails full interaction. You still have to interact with the technology. You have to be engaged in that interaction. With invisible computing, there is some interaction. You still have to tell the speaker that, hey, play Eagles, or what's the score from the Packers game last night? So there is a little bit of interaction that takes place. But this last thing, autonomous machines, is there really any interaction? Can we really say that we are interacting with something that is behaving and operating autonomously? So this, I think, is the area that a lot of people feel like is a threat. This is something that is going to take away from how we live our lives these days. I want to drive myself. I don't want the car to drive myself. I actually enjoy the experience of driving. So that's something that is the experience that I get from that interaction. I don't want that to be taken away from me by the machine. So I'm going to go briefly through these different technologies that I mentioned, just to give you an idea of what is out there right now. Some of these things you might have kind of experienced before. Some of these might be completely new. So this is an example of Google Glass. So it's a product that was briefly launched by Google about 4 or 5 years ago. So it's basically a normal glass that has this display close to your eye, and it can show you information like the weather forecast, or you've got a new phone call, or you've got a new email message, or things like that. So that is called augmented reality. There is a computer image that is superimposed on the reality in front of your eyes. The opposite is virtual reality. So that's a completely computer simulated environment. You usually wear these head-mounted displays that completely cover your eyes. And it looks pretty funny when people are using those. They're just kind of walking around. It looks like they don't really see what they're doing. So what are the benefits here? I just copied these from different companies' websites to see how they're selling these ideas. So the Google Lens, for example, search what you see, explore what's around you in an entirely new way. Or the Microsoft Hololens, with heads-up hands-free video calling, technicians can collaborate with any remote expert on a PC or a mobile device. That sounds pretty good. You've got augmented reality display. You're fixing a piece of farm equipment in the middle of nowhere. You don't know what to do. All you need to do is tap your glasses, call the closest maintenance technician, and they will walk you through the operation. Pretty great. Back in the day, you would have to maybe have the piece of equipment towed into town, and somebody has to fix that, and then it has to be driven back. What are some of the dangers here? Social acceptance. How is this technology changing how we interact with people? I remember about 10 years ago when if you were talking to yourself out and about, people thought you were a little bit crazy. But these days, it's not uncommon for people to have these headsets so that they can take a phone call and talk to somebody. Will virtual reality be used to escape the real reality? Kind of Ready Player One type of thing. The life out here is so depressing that I need to escape into this virtual world. And who gets left behind? Is this technology furthering these social biases that we might have? Pokemon Go, for example, there were some studies that showed that if you live in a rural area, if you live in a socially, an area that doesn't have the same social development as some other area, you don't have anything to play with because there are no players. The developers of Pokemon Go probably didn't think about this when they created the game, but it's kind of something that the technology exposed when people started using it. Then we have technologies that are powered by artificial intelligence. I already mentioned Google, Microsoft, Apple. If you have a reasonably new smartphone, you will have this technology in your device. You can ask the phone to do things and it will try to understand what you need and then react like a human being. My accent is so thick that when I try to use Siri, it's just like, can you please repeat that? But for most of you, hopefully, it's a little bit more understanding. So what are the benefits here? Faster, easier way to do all kinds of things. Your Google Assistant extends to help you across devices like Google Home, your phone, and more. Talk to Cortana. She will answer your questions, give directions, play music, tell you the weather, and so much more. I think Amazon even released an Alexa microwave a couple of weeks ago, so you can tell your microwave to heat up the fries or something like that. So what are the dangers here? Who is in control? How do I use it? What can I do? So if you have this thing on your desk, how do I start interacting with that? I'm going to say, OK, Google, but then what? What's the next step? What are the possibilities? How can I discover what to do with it? When is the device listening? There have been some news that these devices might be listening when we don't expect them to listen, and then they share our data with somebody that we didn't intend them to share it with. Who is using my data? How is my data being used? Honestly, I don't know what happens to whatever my speaker is recording after it leaves that speaker. What is going to be done with it? How can I control that? And in some sense, with some of these technologies, it feels like, well, we did it because we can do it. We built this thing because we could. Now use it for something useful. Finally, we have the autonomous machines. So you can call these robots or self-driving cars or any kind of piece of machinery that performs without human oversight. So it can do tasks independently of a user. What are the benefits? Waymo, that's the Google self-driving car. They say that imagine if everyone could get around easily and safely without tired, drunk, or distracted driving. Amazon Prime Air, that's their drone delivery service. They say that it's a future delivery system that brings packages to customers safely in 30 minutes or less. Increase the overall safety and efficiency of the transportation system. So instead of UPS and DHL vans, we'll have dozens and dozens of drones flying around. Is that going to be any safer? Who knows? And finally, farming. I actually read this piece that said that farmers are at the forefront of using these autonomous devices and vehicles. Because if you have a large farm, you might have only one or two people that have to do all the work. So it makes a lot of sense to have the machine do the work that you cannot do yourself. So are we replacing farmers with technology? Probably not. the idea is to make farming more efficient with these technologies. Again, what are the dangers? Well, who is in control? You step into a self-driving car, who controls the experience? I think with the technologies we have in place right now, you're still supposed to keep your hands on the steering wheel. So the car will drive itself, but you're still supposed to be in control. Well, what if the car makes a decision that you don't like? Can you correct? What happens then? How do we interact with machines? Let's say that I've got an Amazon drone that hovers on my doorstep and there's a problem. What do I do? How do I interact with that? Is it going to talk to me? Can I talk to it? How does that work? Who is responsible when something bad happens? That's actually a major ethical question. So what if you're riding a self-driving car and you hit somebody? Is that your fault, the car's fault, the fault of the company that made the car? There's lots of questions that really don't have clear answers. And finally, how are we changing the nature of work? Automating farming or automating excavation in dangerous places is one thing, but what if my job changes? What if computers will be teaching students and I'm just standing there like, hi. These technologies will change how we work, so we should have some say in what that future will look like. But I have good news. It's not going to happen overnight. So there is this phenomenon called the long tail of technology. So technology will take some time to develop. The first step is when the technology falls below a critical price. So this means that it's actually affordable to buy the technology. Some of these things are actually hitting this point. Amazon, those speakers, Google Home, things like that, drones. I think you can get a drone for less than $100 these days. So these things are kind of within reach for most people. The next step is critical mass. So the penetration of that technology in the marketplace rises above certain value. So it's kind of a thing that you cannot live without. It's something that companies have to use or manufacture so that they can be competitive in the marketplace. After that, this new technology is probably going to displace another technology. We've seen that happen time and time again. First we had C cassettes, then we had CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays. Now we have streaming videos. And finally, the technology becomes nearly free. So there is really no benefit, no money that can be made from selling that technology. So I think something like DVDs are kind of in this place right now. You can get DVDs for like $5 and you can get most of the almost latest movies for a really affordable price. So I think we're here. A lot of the things that I talked about, we're here. We're either reaching critical price or we're reaching critical mass. So there's still time. If you don't feel like this is a good thing, we can still affect the direction of future. If we reach this place or this place, then it's game over. It's so pervasive that it's a really difficult task to change something about technology that dominates the marketplace. So then what should the future be? This is my personal opinion. It's what I teach, so I'm kind of eating my own dog food here. We have to go back to the question, what is interaction? Interaction is the relationship between people and technology that is determined and defined by the user's intentions. If we stay true to that statement, we can take an approach that honors that kind of statement. Because we know technologies will change, interaction styles will change, maybe in 15 years, I just plug in something into my skull and off we go into a virtual environment, who knows. But if we use a human-centered approach, that's going to be the way that we can solve a lot of these problems. If we really think about what do people need, what are their goals, what are they trying to achieve, we can design interactions that are appropriate for the people that are using those technologies. If you want to read more about what the future could be, this is a good book to have in your library. The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. He, for example, talks about what this is. How did a company end up with the design for a tea kettle that you burn yourself when you try to pour something out of it? I think it's a really approachable book that talks about, it doesn't even mention the word computer, I think. It just talks about technologies and things. How do we design things so they're useful for people? And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
We have 15-20 minutes left, so if you have questions for Professor Heimonen, please raise your hand and go ahead and call in.
What about technology? I read articles like in the New Yorker that like people are involved in AI, developing it, corporations, nations,
Right.
everybody actively going after it. What if it becomes self-aware? What if it becomes sentient? And I mean, I realize that's kind of a stretch, but it was a stretch. If you think you have more computing power in your iPhone than they did in the whole NASA project to get to the moon, I don't think it's that much of a stretch, so it brings on a lot of, Philip, you said in one of the just recent ones, human, design technology just essentially served humans. But if it becomes self-aware.
I think we have to change our expectations at that point. I mean, is self-aware AI a person? Probably not in the sense that we think about people being people. But if it's self-aware, that means that we can't treat it as just like a tool. We actually have to respect whatever self-awareness that technology has. And I think there's a lot of really good science fiction movies about what happens at that point. And usually there's not a happy ending. But I think if we stay true to the human-centered approach, then we should also ask, what does the machine want?
But if it says, if you say, well, I'm going to shut you down, and it says negative, I mean, it's just like just strictly from a defense department. I mean, the defense departments all over the world are just chomping at the bit to get at something like that.
Right.
And it raises just tremendous ethical and philosophical questions about sentient machines that we may not be able to control at some point.
Right. And I wish I had answers. I mean, my personal perspective is that it's still a machine. So we, as its creator, we should be able to kind of decide what happens to it. But like you said, there's lots of ethical and legal and moral questions that go with that. I think we had a question back there.
Actually, just a quick comment. There's a really good book called Superintelligence. If you want to learn about that, like how to deal with, AI getting smarter, it's a really good book. Basically, we need to develop their values, develop values and have them learn on that rather than just arbitrary rules that don't align with what we want.
Yeah. I think the question then is, whose values are we teaching?
I'm reading a fiction book now that talks about a technology that can disrupt the computers so they don't work as military applications. Do you see that as a possibility in the future? What kind of new technologies do you see being discovered or invented or used?
Yeah, it's kind of a staple in a lot of science fiction. There's an EMP or electromagnetic pulse or something that wipes out technology, basically. There's some pretty interesting stuff in organic computing. So instead of using silicon and whatever goes into a computer, I don't know, we create these organic machines that wouldn't be sensitive to that kind of disruption. I think we're still pretty far off from that being reality, but that could be one way to go about it. So it's kind of an organic intelligence instead of machine intelligence.
So I watched a pretty interesting TED Talk, and the guy was talking about artificial intelligence, and basically artificial intelligence programs itself. So at that point, who is in control? The humans are supposed to control the machines, but if the machine is learning on its own and writing its own code, how do you then control that?
Right. Yeah, I seem to remember that Google had some kind of algorithm that it didn't become self-aware, but it started changing its own code when it learned more about what it was supposed to do. Kind of going back to the superintelligence book, I think we just kind of have to draw the boundaries on what it can do and then hope that it sticks to that. There are some examples. I believe it was Microsoft that launched Twitter AI, and it learned from the most bad habits of people. So it started insulting people based on the material that was fed into it. Okay, so people were being really mean to that Twitter account, so it learned from that behavior. So I think we have to be really cautious about what are the rules, what are the boundaries that we set for that kind of technology. But you're right, people wouldn't be in control. Ultimately, it does what it does within those parameters.
I mean, General Motors introduced a prototype car for 2020, I think, that doesn't have a steering wheel. So how is the human in control of that vehicle? So if the technology becomes so ubiquitous and machines are learning on their own, writing their own code, how does the human control that? It seems more like the technology would control the human.
Yeah, and if that's the way that it's being developed, then it kind of sounds like it is. I feel like even if we have a self-driving car, ultimately the person should be in control of some decisions. I mean, I'm fully aware that things like staying on lane, not hitting somebody, it might be more efficient doing that using AI technologies. But at the same time, we have those issues that a human is going to program that ultimately. Somebody's going to set some boundaries on how it works. And I think there was a piece of news that an Uber hit a person because it was dark and it couldn't see the person fully. And that was basically a decision by the engineer to set the parameters for the computer vision components of the car. So a human made the decision to make it less sensitive so that it doesn't stop and start all the time. So hopefully, I guess, people would be in the loop in some way. Maybe not by driving the car, but at least setting the parameters of how that technology works.
When I think about self-driving cars, it's something that even if 1% of all the cars on the road are driving themselves, it's not going to be 100% safe until everyone does, because even if the car is staying in the lane, it doesn't stop someone else from driving into it. And the ethics behind, am I going to swerve left and drive into a car, or am I going to swerve right and drive into a parked car with someone in it? It's still up to the designers. I don't think you can ever really program in saying, hey, think about someone's life. We're not at the point yet where we can tell a machine to really think about the ethics of the situation and go in depth in a split second.
Yeah, so I think the problem in that scenario is if we take away the pedals and the steering wheel, then we may basically make the car make the decision. There was actually an interesting backstory to the Google self-driving car. What they found out was that if they make the car follow traffic rules to the letter, it's actually disrupting traffic because human drivers do not obey the same laws. So what they learned was that they actually have to make the car model the behavior of human drivers. So driving unsafely sometimes, speeding, swerving, things like that, so that it actually kind of flows in the normal motion of traffic. It still doesn't solve the problem of, if you have to decide between hitting a car on the left or hitting a car on the right, what do you do at that point? There's lots of really interesting philosophical theories that offer us some answers to that. Do we minimize the overall harm, or do we act in the self-interest of the person in the car versus people outside of the car? Like I said, I don't have answers to that. Hopefully somebody does when that happens. Yeah.
Taking us in a bit of a different direction regarding the jobs and how our job market is changing. How, as an educator, are you kind of addressing that with your students? Because arguably, students are entering a world that's entirely different than the one that maybe their parents and grandparents entered, regarding the way, robots have already greatly impacted manufacturing and things like that, but then with the rise of things like artificial intelligence and even possibly augmented reality and all that, how do you grapple with that with your students?
Right. It used to be that when you got a job, you went to school, you got a job, that was the job for you for life, right? What I try to do with my students, and there's a couple of students in the audience, so you can ask them. You have to be willing to learn, not just in school, but throughout your life. And it's not about the specific things that we teach in the classroom. Like, I'm teaching you a programming language, or I'm teaching you this software program. I'm like, yes, I'm doing that, but I'm also teaching you how to learn how to use new programs. And I think that's going to be the key difference. People that can pick up these new technologies, they can learn these new technologies, are going to be much better able to adapt than somebody that just says, well, I went to school for this is what I know how to do, and this is the only thing that I'm ever going to do. So that's not going to work anymore. Is there a question at the back?
So you said earlier that devices like Alexa, where you can speak to it, you can give you information offhand, could help us get smarter. But I was thinking it almost going to be negative, because you're not instilling in your brain, in your long-term memory, like actual learning and teachings. You can just access it at any moment. Do you think that this is decreasing human consciousness at all? Or?
I think there's definitely the danger if we're not careful about what kind of information we offload to these devices. There's a term called cognitive prosthetic. So these devices kind of are that kind of things. They work as an extension of our mind. And if we start using them for things that we really should try to remember, then that's definitely a danger. Because I see that quite a bit in my classroom. Some students lack basic research skills because they know that I'm just going to go to Google and type it out and it's going to tell me what the answer is. I think that kind of development is dangerous. We still have to be able to retain the skills that make us people, critical thinking, remembering the past so that we don't repeat the mistakes, and just kind of having a common set of information in our head that makes it possible for us to function in the society. If we don't, hey Google, is it okay to pass a stop sign? Like, no, we need to have that information to function.
Yeah. So you mentioned your accent before as it pertained to interacting with these voice commands, like Siri or Alexa or whatever. And my wife and I, every once in a while when we're commuting, just to pass the time, will ask Siri some question and laugh at the nonsensical answer she comes back with. And I mean, my point being is it's not a very effective success rate, I guess, in that service answering questions. We ever get there? I mean, to where, and with our Alexa, it's the same thing at home in our kitchen. It works half the time maybe, but half the time kind of doesn't, are we ever going to get to that point where that's a 95% reliable service? And if not, then I guess what's the point?
As a computer scientist, I would say no.
No, you don't think
We're not. We're gonna get some. We're gonna have pretty decent results, but automatic speech recognition is one of the biggest problems in computer science. You know, being able to understand how humans speak, all the inflections, all the nuances, like all the little things that we get from body language and like just hearing somebody talk, it's almost impossible for a computer to pick that up the same way that a human being is going to pick that up. I think with AI, cloud computing, we're going to get pretty close. We're going to get pretty decent results. We can customize for individuals. So your Alexa can learn exactly how you speak, but are we going to have 100% accuracy? I don't think so. Not in my lifetime, anyway. Do we have somebody here already? All right. Yep.
Internet security, the hackers, getting rid of our password. Do you see anything in the future with all that?
With respect to kind of these things that I talked about, or just in general security.
Well, right now it seems like we're subject to hackers. Okay.
Yeah.
Will that ever be resolved? It's a code war, is it not?
Right. I mean, the two sides come up with better security technologies, and the other side becomes better at breaking those technologies. I think probably not. And it's a real concern with some of these devices, like, you know, you've got a speaker in your home that can listen to what's going on. Well, what if it's not Amazon that's listening to you? What if it's somebody that hacks into your device? You know, what are the implications of that? I think there are some things in the future that might offer some solutions, but I don't know if they're any better. Things like biometrics, so scanning your iris or scanning your thumbprint or you know, things like that. So instead of a password, we actually have to use some biometric, you know, identification to log into different things. That reveals another set of problems. What if somebody steals that information? Now they can impersonate you. So, I think that was one question at the back.
So do you think there should be an age limit for kids to use technology or should use technology?
I think some of them, the companies are trying to insist on some age technologies, like games, for example. It's kind of a catch-22, you know. If you introduce an age limit, then it means that they're not going to learn the skills early that they're probably going to need in the future. But at the same time, if you don't impose that limit, then who knows who might be taking advantage of them if they hack into those devices and things like that. So I don't think there's a clear answer. I think some technologies, I don't think a 9-year-old should be taking a self-driving car necessarily to, you know, go to McDonald's. But should a 9-year-old be able to use a virtual reality headset? I don't see what the problem is as long as the content is something that is suitable for that age limit.
I'd like to return to your first question, what is interaction? And my bias when I heard the word was thinking of personal interaction between two agents of comparable ability. And so you're matching up a machine and a human, which are not comparable in many ways. And so it's a metaphor. And it seems like to satisfy the metaphor, we either want to elevate the machine to a human status or dumb down the human to a machine status. But that's to satisfy the metaphor. And I wonder, is there another, in your business, you use another word besides interaction that wouldn't necessarily carry that baggage of thinking of personal interaction, which is not what you meant, but you used it in a more generic way.
I use the word use a lot. So I use technology. I think that has a different connotation than interaction. we apply technology, we utilize technology, we communicate with the computer or technology. But it's true that interaction does have that meaning that we have people that are reasonably at the same level. And unfortunately, a lot of the things we use means that we dumb ourselves down to the level of the technology so that it can understand what we try to say. So for example, we have to say, okay Google, before we can talk to Google Home. It cannot understand if we just speak. It's like, hey Google, we have to use a specific phrase for it to understand. So yes, if you're looking for different words, use is a pretty good one. But in my field, we use the word interaction because that's kind of, we frame the concept a little differently.
Folks, we have time for one more question, then Professor Heimonen will be around to talk individually afterwards.
Jay, I have a question.
How will we end with an opinion? Do you like where we're going with technology right now, the dependence that we have on it, or do you feel it's a dangerous path?
Given that I'm a bit of a nerd, I kind of like the stuff that I have that's coming out, but I don't think that it's necessarily healthy how much we depend on technology for things that we should be doing ourselves. I think particularly these virtual assistants that we start having Alexa in our washing machines and pretty much Alexa is everywhere. Alexa, is that really living in the sense? I mean, yes, it serves a role, but I think sometimes you should see a little bit of effort in doing your dishes or things like that. Just my personal opinion.
How about a hand for Professor Heimonen?